Well, here's the man himself. Are you enjoying this campaign so far?
It's had its ups and downs, and it no doubt continue to have that. But when I get the chance to talk about the things that people tell me they need solutions to, then it's fine.
Do you have any sympathy with the comments made by Warren Bradley that we saw there?
No, I sure understand Liberal Democrats across the country who are really concerned about the impact on the party of the UK coalition. So I understand his concerns, absolutely. I mean, I think the important side to what's happening there is making sure that we do make the positive case about tax changes that the UK government have introduced. I mean, a Tory government by themselves would not have helped low-earning income families in Scotland, and that's now happened with the Lib Dems. So there are some positives as well. But yeah, it's a difficult election. I've always accepted that, including, I think, Gordon, in discussions with you before.
Right, but I mean, he thinks the Liberal Democrats should quit the coalition.
Well, I don't think that's particularly credible, because if that happened, there'd be another general election and the Tories would undoubtedly win it. So how would that help the Liberal Democrats in
How
making the
argument? How do you know the Tories would win it?
Well, I don't know what will happen in a UK general election, because we're not going to have one. But I think what is likely is that if you went down that scenario, we wouldn't do anything other than awfully badly in it. And I don't think that's sensible, when the argument that that colleagues made in London was about dealing with the deficit, dealing with the financial problems that had been inherited from the previous UK Labour government, and that still remains the case.
But I mean, sorry, if your argument for the Liberal Democrats staying in this coalition is that you get clobbered in an election if you left it, it's a pretty weak argument, isn't it?
Well, it's not going to happen, so it's a wonderfully hypothetical question that you can ask.
What if you lose the referendum on voting?
Well, I hope we don't lose the referendum on voting, Gordon. We're trying to win that. I mean, I would like to see a better voting system at Westminster, so why would I concede we're going to lose it? I think the argument's being made, and Charles Kennedy's leading the campaign here in Scotland and getting that point across. Douglas Alexander was with him the other day making that case.
You would accept, would you? And you, in fact, seem to be accepting from what you've said so far, that the problems you're having here and the reason you're getting these lousy poll ratings at the moment is because of the fact the Liberal Democrats are in the coalition in London rather than anything that's happening locally.
I certainly accept that any government have got to take the toughest decisions going because of the financial deficit that they encountered, but that they inherited from Labour, yes, are going to face unpopularity. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Right.
Now, so what do you say then to voters who you meet on the doorsteps, who say to you, as I'm sure lots of them do, look, these Liberal Democrats, they sign personal pledges not to increase tuition fees, including some Scottish Liberal Democrat MPs, and the first thing they did when they got a sniff of power was ratted on it.
Well, the answer to that in Scotland is very, very simple and very direct, which is that we're standing in a Scottish election, and my record and the record of every Liberal Democrat MSP in our Parliament here in Scotland, for which this election's about, is very clear on that. We voted to get rid of Labour's fees, we voted to get rid of the graduate endowment, and we invested more in education, in higher education, than any government had done before. So, pretty strong record of those of us who are standing for election in this election.
Yeah, but the problem with that is that completely misses the point.
Well, I don't think it does if you're an MSP standing on your record, which I am.
No, it doesn't miss the point, because the problem that many voters have with the Liberal Democrats at the moment is not to do with the difference between Scottish Liberal Democrat policy on tuition fees and Liberal Democrat policy in London. It's that your MPs signed personal pledges not to do something.
Sure, but those MPs are not up for re-election, Gordon.
Yeah, that's not the point. People say,
I think it is, actually.
Well, actually, it isn't, because
we might just disagree on that.
Because what people are saying is, look, those Liberal Democrats are what their opponents have always said. They're a bunch of opportunists. They would sell their granny for a whiff of power, and we don't, even if we're not interested in the issue of tuition fees at all, the point about this is nothing to do with tuition fees, is that they lied to the voters. They did the opposite of what they said they would do, which was be open and honest.
Well, if they were all up for election in 3 weeks' time, I'm sure you'd have them on the programme explaining that one to you. But we're standing in a Scottish election where we've said A, what we did, and B, what we want to do in the next election. Actually, I don't know how many doorsteps you've been on, but you're right, I have been on an awful lot. And people tell me that we get the point of what you've done in Scotland and your record on this issue in Scotland, and we understand what you're trying to do for the future. And also, I may say, they understand devolution, which is there will be, and I think that's right, different solutions in different parts of the country. And they respect the fact that we've made this case and we've got that voting record.
Right. So, do you think your colleagues in London were wrong to do what they did?
Well, I wouldn't have done what they did, but I'm not in those circumstances. I'm not standing to be an MP in the House of Commons. I'm standing to seek to be re-elected to the Scottish Parliament, and we'll concentrate on the issues about how we solve the funding issues for higher education here in Scotland. I think that's what people are asking me to do.
Right. So I'm not quite getting this. You're saying you are a Liberal. I mean, you know,
it's devolution, Gordon. It is a different part of the United Kingdom. What they decide for English higher education
from the party at Westminster.
Well, we are a separate party in a federal
United Kingdom. With them. It's just a coincidence that Nick Clegg happens to be a Liberal Democrat, is it?
Well, if you want to put it that way, you can. But I mean, what I think everyone gets is this a devolved election for a Scottish Parliament for the nation of Scotland, and on that we have a different solution that we've had for 12 years for higher education. And I think we're going to continue that. Now that's a different set of circumstances. We have a different policy.
Why do you think your polls are so rotten then?
Well, I think, you made the point right at the start of this discussion about
but I thought you've just told me that people understand that Tavish Scott and the Scottish Liberal Democrats are only coincidentally connected to Nick Clegg and his English Liberal Democrats.
Well, you're putting it that way. I didn't describe it in the way in which you've just put it. But what I do think people understand is that this is a Scottish election, but of course United Kingdom matters are part of the debate we're having, and that undoubtedly has influenced the election. I've always accepted that, including in the earlier discussions we've had.
Do you agree with George Osborne and Danny Alexander that it is necessary and indeed imperative to cut public spending so far and so fast?
Well, I know we've got to deal with the deficit. There will always be a debate about the speed in which you do that, but I don't think we have any doubt about the need to deal with the level of debt the country is
so far
carrying.
And so fast.
Well, I mean, that's the phrase used, but what's the alternative? What's the plan B? The plan B was the one
I'm just trying to establish whether you agree with them. So when Scottish Labour and the Scottish Nationalists say, actually, there was no compelling reason to cut the deficit so quickly, and so far,
for which
you think they're wrong?
Well, they've never presented a plan B. What is their plan B?
Yeah,
and I think that's
Labour's plan was to reduce the deficit by half.
Well, but that changes depending on whether you have Ed Balls in your programme or Ed Miliband.
Right, I just trying to clarify. So you agree with George and Danny against the SNP and Scottish Labour?
Well, I just think if you're going to have an alternative to the current plans, you've got to propose what it is, and neither the SNP or Labour can say how they deal with the deficit.
Right, this is important in the Scottish election, isn't it? Because the reality is that the Scottish budget that the next administration is going to have to deal with, which involves very substantial cuts, is in a very meaningful sense a Liberal Democrat budget.
Well, I think it's a Labour budget. It's Labour who put us in this dreadful hole that we're currently in.
I think you'll find that the budget settlement that Scotland's got...
I think Labour were in government for 13 years, Gordon, and they were the ones who deregulated the banks. They were the ones who created the mess we're all now in. And yes, a new government's having to deal with that. But to suggest that Labour weren't responsible for the mess we're in, I think is just to zero game out what happened over the last few years.
Sorry, I wasn't suggesting that at all. I was simply making the point that the budget which the next Scottish administration is going to have to deal with was in a very significant sense set by Danny Alexander and his colleagues in the Treasury.
Correct.
OK. Health spending, should that be protected in the way that the current SNP government has protected it?
We would do our best to achieve that, yes. I think it's sensible to try and maintain health spending, and certainly in terms of the consequentials, all the extra money that comes through the current arrangements that govern our budget in Scotland, we would commit to doing that, yeah. So
any money that you save from efficiencies, for example, by your idea of saving money in prescribing, you think could save £50 million immediately, going up to about £100 million, that would all be reinvested in the health service, wouldn't it? Well,
we would hope to protect frontline services. I'm not in for protecting everything in the National Health Service.
So hang on, so you're not protecting the health budget, you're just protecting frontline services?
I just think I'm absolutely want to make sure we protect frontline health services. If you're saying that the bureaucracy is perfect in the National Health Service and we can't all achieve something...
I'm not saying it. You keep saying I'm saying things. I'm simply saying will you echo the commitment?
Well, I've said
to
yes
protect
to that, Gordon, but then...
No, hang on. You said you're not saying yes. You're not saying you would protect, in real terms, the health service budget.
I did say that, but my point is simply that there must be areas and are areas which doctors and nurses and other health professionals tell me all the time that can be saved in terms of the health budget, and it's how we make really good judgments about that to save money to help frontline patient care that I'm interested in. And does that mean the budget stays absolutely the same? No, monies do change within that health budget, and that's what any sensible government would do.
And any efficiency savings would be reinvested in the NHS. I'm still not clear what your answer to that is.
Well, we would seek to make sure those efficiency, as long as they're going to be invested in frontline. As long as they're going to be invested in frontline services, I think that's a pretty important commitment to it. I mean, I'm not interested in investing in bureaucracy. We've got far too much of that across Scotland as it is.
The proposal to close the accident and emergency departments at Ayr and Monklands, you campaigned against that, did you?
I'd not. Which election are we talking about?
In 2006, 2007.
I don't even remember the.
Oh, you just to remind you, you were in the government that approved the plans to close it. Ayr.
Well, yes, but those were decisions taken at the time, and they were subsequently overturned by another government. Right, but
were you against that at the time?
Against what?
Against the proposal to close these accident and emergency departments.
Well, it was government policy to seek to.
And you were in the government.
Yes, so
you were in favour of
it at the time. Yeah.
Right. So can you explain to me why, when Labour did its U-turn on the issue, what George Lyon, your campaign director, meant? This is a couple of weeks ago. He derided Labour's U-turn on the issue by saying, quote, "People haven't forgotten that it was Labour who planned to close the A&E at Monklands Hospital. In fact, it was Labour and the Liberal Democrats who proposed to close the A&E at Monklands Hospital."
Sure.
So what did George Lyon mean?
Well, I think he was pointing out the inconsistency of Labour's position.
Sorry, but so you are still in favour of closing the A&E department at Monklands Hospital, are you?
No, that's not our policy. 4 years has gone by, Gordon. You're harking back to something 4 years ago.
Well, sorry, what is the inconsistency in Labour's position that's not an inconsistency in your position?
Well, you'll have to ask Labour about their policy on health.
No, I'm asking you about George Lyon.
Well, he's made, in that statement, he makes clear that we don't think the way in which Labour have started to make sure that they're on the same page as the SNP on every policy issue in this election, which is what's happening on nearly every day. Is the correct
but he says people haven't forgotten it was Labour who planned to close the A&E at Monklands Hospital, when in fact you planned to close it.
Well, it was a government at the time who took that decision, yes.
But you see, isn't this, coming back to the start of this conversation, this is what people think about the Liberal. Isn't that typically the kind of duplicity you get from Liberal Democrats? That somehow George Lyon is pretending that the Liberal Democrats had nothing to do with a government which they were in fact members of, just as you pretend to have nothing to do with a government in London that your party are in fact members of.
Well, that's not what I said, Gordon. I said there was a different arrangement to do with higher education funding north and south of the border. That is a practical implication of devolution. I'm surprised that seems to be such a surprise, because I think it's right to have different solutions for Scotland. We could discuss a lot of our other areas like police, where the SNP, Labour and the Tories all want to have a single police force for Scotland. I want to make sure that we keep our police services and we don't lose 3,000 police officers across Scotland. The Federation of Small...
But you think Labour are inconsistent, that's what you're saying. But I still don't quite understand...
Well, that was the point George Lyon was making.
Oh, right, OK. And so, but you're no longer in favour of closing these A&Es because it's out of date. Are you in favour of reintroducing prescription charges?
No, because...
Are you in favour of freezing the council tax?
Yes.
So, in fact, you've done the full Labour hat-trick of U-turns.
Well, we would like to introduce a local income tax for funding our councils, but we can't do that in May of this year.
But hang on, you're accusing Labour of U-turns and inconsistency. You've done all the same U-turns that Labour have done.
The council tax in the Parliament we've just had, Gordon. So I don't understand remotely what your point is. We've just passed a budget a number of weeks ago in which we passed that, agreed that measure. And on council tax funding, we have made clear our desire to see a local income tax, and that's something we'll take forward in the next Parliament. But you need parliamentary any agreement for it, and there isn't any.
You're now in favour of SNP policy on council tax, of SNP
well, I
policy
don't agree with the SNP on the National
Department,
Police Force, which is the policy I'd be delighted to discuss if you'd allow me to do so.
And prescription charges. I mean, and you accuse Labour of U-turns.
Well, the prescription charges point is simple. It's been a democratic decision of the Parliament. I don't happen to agree with it, but I don't get my way on every issue that goes on in Parliament. But on a national police force, the Parliament, the other parties all want that. It'll cost 3,000 police officers across Scotland. That's what the chief constables say. It's now what the Scottish Federation of Policemen say, and the Association of Chief Constables. And I think that's a pretty important issue.
Scottish Water. What exactly is the import of Danny Alexander's comments in the midst? I mean, do you now have an official agreement with your coalition partners and the Conservatives in London that should you ever be in a position to implement your plan, you will get at least £1.5 billion?
We would hope to be in the government of Scotland after the election and be able to take that policy forward, because that's a government-to-government discussion that's happened. But as Danny Alexander made very clear on Friday, I think to the BBC as well as to others, he believes the plan can work and it would bring £1.5 billion or potentially more into the Scottish economy. I think that's a really important investment.
But you don't have an agreement with the Conservatives?
Well, of course we don't. You don't have an agreement with the Conservatives when we're an opposition
you need
party.
their agreement in London to do that.
But it's a government-to-government relationship. That never happens. Did Labour get agreement to that?
See, people are saying, look, if we can think of any benefits of having the Liberal Democrats in the government in London, it's the Scottish Liberal Democrats can go and agree.
It's a ridiculous point you're making. You're saying that an opposition party in Scotland should have the Treasury and the current UK government agree to something during an election campaign. You know that doesn't happen. But what can happen after the election is, instead of buying the SNP spin, we can actually achieve £1.5 billion investment in the Scottish economy.
So the idea of getting the agreement of your own government in London to something is ridiculous.
Danny Alexander said on Friday it's a credible plan, and we're going to be able to do it. And I find it extraordinary that you buy the SNP spin, the idea that you can pick a fight with the SNP and the UK government instead of finding a way to invest £1.5 billion in the Scottish economy.
Do you know what?
That's a good thing.
Do you know what? It doesn't matter, because you'll abandon this policy immediately after the election, won't you? Because neither the SNP nor Labour agree with it.
Well, if Labour and the SNP are against investing £1.5 billion into Scottish economy...
Because if you go in a coalition with anyone, you won't be able to get that policy through.
I think we'll... Are you seriously telling me that Labour and the SNP will be against investing £1.5 billion in the Scottish economy? Well, the SNP's own budget group came up with this policy. Their own independent budget advisors came up with this approach.
So would you refuse to go into a coalition with anyone unless they at least tried to put this policy into...
I think it would be very sensible to try and invest £1.5 billion.
But would you refuse to go into a coalition?
I'm going to use the words I want to use, Gordon. I think it would be very foolish for any other party to not invest £1.5 billion in the Scottish economy.
Well, hang on, you're coming over all Cleggish now, aren't you? I mean, look, given the trust issue with Liberal Democrats, I know what you usually do in Scottish elections is say, look, we can't have bottom lines and conditions. That all gets decided when the voters have had their say. Given that people do not trust your party because of what Nick Clegg did...
That's your view.
Surely,
not the view of the doorsteps I was on this morning, if I may say so.
You can't continue...
I'm not accepting that no one trusts the Liberal Democrats. I'm absolutely not accepting that at all.
All right, in that case you can tell us what your bottom lines are. Would you or would you not make your Scottish water plans, which after all is the centrepiece of your manifesto, if the SNP or Labour said, no, we're not having that, would you refuse to go into a coalition?
Well, I'd like to achieve that, but you'll need to ask them why they would refuse to invest £1.5 billion in the Scottish economy.
But I'm asking you whether you would make that a condition of a coalition.
Well, I want to make that happen, but I don't know what the election results are going to be.
And your answer is you don't want to answer the question.
Well, that's, you always put it that way, but I'm making clear what I want to achieve.
No, I'm putting it that way because that's what you're doing. You're not answering the question.
I want to achieve £1.5 billion investment in the Scottish economy. That can really help to move our economy forward. We've found a way to do it. The independent budget review of the current government agrees that that's a way to do it. The Chief Executive of Scottish Water, the body responsible, agrees that that's a sensible way to do it. And you're telling me that no one else wants to support it. You'll have to ask them.
We're running out of time. Jeremy Purvis, when he was here the other day, said that he wouldn't go into a coalition. He had a bottom line. He said no independence referendum. Is that your position as well?
Well, the independence revolution, I don't even know if it's going to happen, because the SNP, we've had all these leaders now, they never mention independence.
You refused to go into a coalition last time because of that. Would you refuse again?
But they haven't even published the manifesto. Why should I even believe it's there?
So you might, in fact, if you might go into coalition with the SNP.
But I don't support independence. They never mention it in the campaign, and who knows whether they'll even have a referendum. You'll need to ask them. We don't know what's in the manifesto.
Right, message from the Lib Dems, ask everyone else. Right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Quick look at tomorrow's front pages, very quick look if we've got them. Daily Record, there we are. We will snatch hate song bigots. This is about the old firm. Scotsman, UK's transit lounge for war criminals. That's a quote. That's from relatives of Lockerbie reacting to the news that the Musakusa has gone to Qatar from the UK. The Times, every 1 in 5 young and jobless. This is an investigation they are doing. The Guardian, A&E chief casualty units not coping, they say. Right, that's all we have time for tonight. I'll be back again tomorrow. Until then, from all of us in the programme, good night.